Now, leftists, as we know, are determined to induct children into the LGBT cult as early as possible and by any means at their disposal. That's why we must be totally determined and dedicated to protecting children from this abuse. And that's also all the more reason why it was so dispiriting and really, frankly, tragic on Friday, a day before the Sodom and Gomorrah festivities kicked off, to see Fox News jump on the LGBT grooming bandwagon. Actually, Fox didn't just join the bandwagon, they skipped all the way to the front of it. They ran out in front of the bandwagon so they could be, leading it. During their America's Newsroom broadcast, Fox ran a package by reporter Brian Yanes promoting and celebrating the transing of children. This was not a report reporting on this controversy, but celebrating it, promoting it actively. The propaganda was so radical, so far to the left, that I would have honestly been surprised to see it on CNN or even MSNBC. But even those outlets have not quite gone as far to the left on the trans issue as Fox apparently has, at least with this report. That's how bad it is. It's certainly bad enough that I have to call them out. I appear on Fox News often. I've benefited from the platform, from the visibility that they've given me. It's quite possible that by attacking them publicly, I've now ruined that relationship. So be it in that case. They really left us no choice. The segment was that bad. But don't take my word for it. Let's go through this and kind of watch it together, just so we can see how bad this really is. Here it is.
Walking down the street, you wouldn't think anything different.
14-year-old Ryland Whittington is a typical Southern California teenager. And the Whittingtons, along with mom Hillary, dad Jeff, and sister Brinley, are a typical family. The only difference, though, in Ryland's eyes, is what this family can mean to the tens of thousands of kids under 18 who identify as transgender.
We put our story out there so people could see that there's another family out there that is going through what we're going through, or there's another family who's proud of who they are.
Before Ryland could even speak, he managed to tell his parents that he is a boy.
I could just see that it wasn't him trying to be a brat. It was painful. It was truly painful for him to have to wear feminine clothing and for us constantly telling him that you're a girl.
And unlike some trans kids, when Ryland came out at age 5 a few years later, he had the full support of his parents.
Before the girl could speak, she was communicating that she's a boy. Before she could speak, Fox wants us to believe that babies can choose their own gender. Children so young that they don't yet have the ability to communicate in words can still, according to Fox, consent to begin a gender transition. And on what basis? Where is the evidence for this wild assertion? How do we know that babies have a concept of quote-unquote gender identity? Well, because here's why. Because this baby didn't want to wear dresses. That's it. That's the whole story. That's the whole story. Didn't want to wear dresses. By this logic, of course, almost every baby girl is really a boy. There are no girls left in the world, it turns out. Because almost every young girl in the world, and that has ever existed in the world, has gone through at least a phase where they didn't want to wear the clothes their parents put them in. Every boy has also gone through this phase. So maybe every boy is really a girl and every girl is really a boy. We'll just trade places. Make it simple. There are no girls left in the world except boys. The only girls left in the world are boys, and the only boys left are girls. This is the utter irredeemable madness that flows from the kind of demented, half-baked, incomprehensible pseudo-logic you just heard from Fox. Never mind the fact that, once again, the trans activists are rigidly enforcing gender roles. While claiming that they want to break down gender roles, they are rigidly enforcing them. The idea that the girl, just might be a girl who doesn't like quote-unquote girly things, that never even occurs to these parents or to any trans activist. Well, she's 2 years old. She doesn't want to wear a dress. Maybe she just doesn't like the dresses. Not to mention the fact that the one dress that we saw there was hideously ugly. So we can hardly blame her for not wanting to wear that one. That could be it. If your 2-year-old daughter doesn't want to wear the dress, it could just be she just is 2, doesn't want to wear a dress right now. Or she could really be a boy. Oh yeah, that must be it. She's a boy. So according to the trans activists and to the left and now to Fox News, girls must like girly things. And if they don't, then they're boys. So good news, ladies. You can be anything you want to be. You have self-determination. Nobody can tell you what to do. You are your own person. Be yourself. Unless you don't like the color pink, or if you prefer not to wear dresses, and then you can't even be a girl anymore. You're now a boy. Here's some injections to sterilize you and permanently alter your voice. Oh, we'll also have to remove your breasts. You're not going to be needing those ever in your whole life. We've decided, because you don't like wearing dresses. You don't like wearing dresses, so we're going to chop your breasts off, and you'll never have that bodily function ever again. This is the deranged, dangerous insanity that Fox News is selling. And it gets worse. Listen.
Initially, there was some pushback from us in trying to understand this.
We were confused like most people are. We thought that gender and sexuality were the same thing. It took us a while to figure out that those two things are different and that children actually do recognize their gender identity very young. Some of them, not all.
But they listened to Rylan and to Hillary's conservative faith.
For me, it's just a deep spiritual belief that if you believe in God and he, created us the way he wanted us, well then yes, he created Rylan just the way he is.
And they listened to families. They met in support groups.
There was a father who was sitting across the table. He says, "You have no idea how lucky you are to be here," which kind of took me back. I didn't at that point consider myself lucky to be there. And he said, our child had displayed this gender dysphoria or this gender misalignment at the same age that Rylan has. And we didn't listen, and we pushed back.
That pushback led that child to turn to self-harm as a teenager, which 60% of trans and non-binary kids engage in, according to the Trevor Project. More than 50% consider suicide.
That, for me, was the turning point. I didn't want to see Rylan to go through that.
I'd rather have a living son than a dead daughter.
Like I told you, this is actually worse, more radical, more extreme than anything we've heard on MSNBC at this point, up to this point, on this subject. They're packing all of the most extreme and nonsensical trans agenda talking points into one piece of propaganda. We've already heard that a girl chose her own gender when she was a toddler and then came out when she was 5. That's an actual sentence that was uttered on the air on Fox News. When she came out when she was 5, she's been on the earth for only 5 years. She has almost no understanding of the world or herself or human biology. She's not going to be a legal adult for another 13 years. Her brain won't be fully developed for another 20 years. And yet she was able to make this decision for herself. And then we're told that the parents' conservative faith is what drove them. Mommy Munchausen says that God doesn't make mistakes, and she's right about that. Yet her conviction that God doesn't make mistakes is what led her to the conclusion that her daughter was born in the wrong body and was really supposed to be her son. And the only way to fix it is with drugs and surgery. On the contrary, it turns out that according to her, God does make mistakes. He makes pretty big ones, it turns out. There are some major screw-ups on the heavenly assembly line, and somehow boy souls are put into girl bodies and vice versa. And this seems to be happening a lot more recently, too, somehow. Must be a new management up at the factory. Probably should review their training protocols. I don't know. No, by Mommy Munchausen's telling, God is a bumbling fool, an idiot, whose work needs to be checked and corrected with the help of the pharmaceutical industry. That's what she thinks. Next, we're given a few alleged facts and figures from the far-left propagandist organization, the Trevor Project, which claims that alleged trans kids will kill themselves if they're not allowed to transition their gender. I'd rather have a living son than a dead daughter, Mommy Munchausen tells us. This is the macabre bumper sticker slogan that has served to justify the butchery of thousands of children. There's no data to back it up. Nothing. In fact, as we discussed last week, the data shows that gender transition does not decrease the suicide rate. In fact, the data shows that it increases it. Suicidality is highest a decade after transition. That's what the data shows. The suicide claim from trans activists is nothing but emotional blackmail. In the case of these horrendous, evil parents, it's simply a rationale. It's self-justification to legitimize their choices after the fact. Speaking of legitimizing choices after the fact, nobody at Fox has explained how this toxic nonsense ended up on the airwaves. I know for a fact that many of the people who work at Fox do not agree with this, do not want to be associated with it, but a decision was made by somebody to do this report and air it. All the parties involved should explain themselves, and then they should be fired also. Oh, are you promoting cancel culture? You want to cancel these people? Absolutely, I want to cancel them. Yes. They should be fired for sure. Named, shamed, and fired. When you put dishonest, militant trans propaganda on the airwaves, that's going to do and is doing immeasurable harm to thousands of kids, then yeah, you should be fired for that. Fox speaks largely to a conservative audience, and nobody in the audience wants any part of this. Of all the people that were watching Fox on that Friday when that report aired, how many of them wanted that? So this is propaganda made by and for an audience that doesn't watch Fox and hates Fox, and especially hates Fox's actual audience. But forget about conservative for a moment, okay? Put that aside. If Fox News wants to call itself news, then it cannot put insane falsehoods and radical far-left lies and propaganda on the air if you want to be a news organization. Especially this kind of propaganda, worst of all. Propaganda which aims to exploit and destroy children. So, Fox's audience has to call the network to account. I mean, nothing less than a full retraction and apology should be accepted here. It's up to the audience to demand that. So the audience can decide whether they just want to let this slide as Fox News celebrates Pride Month, putting up trans propaganda that, again, would not be aired by any other major network on TV right now. A lot of them would go close to what you just saw from Fox, but they wouldn't even go that far. Suggesting that a toddler can choose her own gender. When you hear that from the left, but even on CNN, they would say, it's a little too far. Maybe in a year or two, we'll be at a point where we can put that out there and not have any blowback. Now, Fox's audience should have zero tolerance policy for propaganda of any kind, especially trans propaganda. And you need to make sure that Fox gets that memo. Listen, hit that subscribe button right now. Do it right now. I thank you for your compliance. It is somewhat appreciated.